Okay, so you know how some topics are just like cliche magnets? It's
Oh,
like you
yeah.
just know what's coming.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of who initiates sex in a relationship, that's definitely one of those. It's like cue the eye rolls, the
Yeah.
knowing glances, the same old jokes.
Right. Like we've heard it all before.
Exactly. But then
Got
you dug a little deeper, right? You wanted to get past the surface, past those cliches, and you found this episode of Real Talk with Lady T,
Yeah.
which I gotta say really dives into this whole thing in a refreshing way.
It's so interesting, right? It seems like such a simple question. Who makes the first move? But as Lady T and Mr. Tee-riffic point out, it gets at these bigger issues like power dynamics, expectations.
Communication. They're huge on communication.
Huge. And those are the things that really make or break a relationship in the long run.
Oh, for sure. And they don't shy away from any of it. Like, right off the bat, they're making jokes about grabbing popcorn because things are about to get real.
Right. They use humor in such a smart way. You know, it's like
Hmm.
they're creating this safe space where you can actually talk about this stuff without feeling judged.
Totally. It's like, okay, we're all a dog here. Let's be honest with ourselves. And one of the first things they do is tackle that whole stereotype of men always being the initiator.
Yes. They shut that down right away.
Which is so important. It's not just about being politically correct or whatever. They get into why that assumption is actually harmful.
Exactly. Like on a practical level.
Yeah.
For men, it creates this pressure to always be the one to make the move, to be the pursuer, which, let's be honest, can be exhausting.
Absolutely. And for women, it can make them feel like they're not supposed to have desires, or that expressing those desires makes them too forward or something.
Totally. And that can create this imbalance in the relationship where one person feels obligated and the other feels pressured. And nobody wants that.
Exactly. Like, I remember this one time I was seeing this guy, and he was, oh man, this guy was really nice, don't get me wrong, but it was like clockwork, you know? Every single time it was him initiating. And at first I didn't really think anything of it. It's like what you're supposed to expect.
It's like, that's the script we've all been given.
Exactly. But then after a while, it started to make me feel kind of weird, like invisible almost, you know?
Totally. And it's not about you being needy or anything like that. It's about that balance of power we were talking about.
Yeah, like my needs and my desires didn't even factor into the equation.
Exactly. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because if you're not initiating, then your partner might start to think you're not interested, which only perpetuates the cycle.
It's so true. And the worst part is I never actually said anything to him about it.
It's tough, right? Because how do you even bring that up without feeling like you're going to hurt their feelings or make things awkward?
Exactly. Like, am I supposed to just blurt out, hey, you're making me feel invisible by always making the first move?
Right. It's like, where's the handbook for that conversation? But you know what? Lady T and Mr. Tee-riffic made such a good point about how initiation isn't just about physical desire,
Oh, yeah. They were really big on that.
because it's about so much more than that. It's about expressing affection and reassurance and letting your partner know that you want them.
Yeah. It's like they use that analogy of a plant needing water.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
If you never water it, it's gonna die.
Exactly. And relationships need that kind of nourishment too.
And when we don't initiate, it's like we're holding back a part of ourselves, and our partners might not even realize what they're missing.
Absolutely. And then on the flip side, when we do initiate, it can be such a powerful way to connect with our partners and build intimacy.
It's like you're taking charge of your own pleasure and your own desires.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a message that I think a lot of people need to hear.
For sure. And I think that's why communication is so crucial in all of this. They really emphasized that, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like that was one of the biggest takeaways for me.
Because if you're not comfortable talking to your partner about these things, then how can you expect to have a healthy and fulfilling sex life?
Exactly. And it's not just about saying, hey, I want you to initiate more. It's about understanding each other's needs and finding a dynamic that works for both of you.
Right. Like maybe one person is more comfortable initiating in certain situations or at certain times of the day.
Yeah. Or maybe there are different ways of initiating that feel good for each person. It's about figuring all of that out together.
Totally. But I think one of the things that makes these conversations so difficult is that we're still battling these societal expectations, you know?
Oh, for sure. Like those expectations don't just disappear overnight.
I feel like for men, there's still this pressure to be the pursuer, to make the first move.
Right. And if they don't, it's like their masculinity is somehow being questioned.
It's so frustrating.
It really is. And then for women, there's this whole thing about being perceived as too aggressive or too forward if they initiate too much.
It's like we're supposed to be these delicate flowers who just wait around for the man to make a move.
Right. And then we wonder why so many women feel disconnected from their own sexuality.
Seriously. Like, where's the space for us to own our desires and go after what we want?
It's tough because, on one hand, we have these messages telling women to be more assertive in other areas of their lives, like in the workplace. But when it comes to relationships, suddenly it's like, oh no, you need to dial it back.
It makes no sense. And it can create so much unnecessary confusion and frustration.
Totally. And then there's the whole fear of rejection, which, let's be real, can be paralyzing for both men and women.
Oh, absolutely. That vulnerability hangover is real.
Because putting yourself out there always involves a certain level of risk.
For sure. And when it comes to something as intimate as sex, those feelings of rejection can cut even deeper.
Exactly. Because it can feel like a rejection of not just our bodies, but of who we are at our core.
And I think that's why this episode was so refreshing, because Lady T and Mr. Tee-riffic really emphasize the importance of empathy and understanding.
Yes. Like they talked about how sometimes a partner's lack of initiation might have absolutely nothing to do with us or the relationship.
Exactly. Like maybe they're stressed from work or just not feeling well or a million other things.
Totally. And if we immediately jump to those worst case scenarios, it just creates this breeding ground for insecurity and resentment,
Oh, for sure. And it can turn something that's easily fixable into this huge relationship ending drama.
which is why those open lines of communication are so important. Like if something's bothering, you just talk about it.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to initiate yourself.
Yes, because sometimes taking that leap of faith can be the best thing for your relationship.
Totally. And it sends such a powerful message to your partner like, hey, I see you. I want you. And I'm not afraid to go after what I want.
It's about owning your desires and feeling empowered to express them.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this whole conversation so important. It's not just about who's making the first move. It's about creating a dynamic in your relationship where both partners feel seen, heard, and desired.
Exactly. And that's what Lady T and Mr. Tee-riffic really drove home in this episode. It's like they said, don't be afraid to communicate your needs. Don't be afraid to initiate. And don't be afraid to be open to trying new things.
And at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? Finding that balance, keeping the spark alive, and creating a sex life that feels good for both of you.
Absolutely. And I think this episode gave us a lot to think about in terms of how we can do just that.
For sure. So to our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Remember, relationships are all about communication, empathy, and a willingness to put yourself out there. And sometimes taking that first step can make all the difference.